Welcome to the Encore Audio Archives YouTube channel. I'm Taper Dave, and this is my channel. I've uploaded hundreds of talks here that I've recorded at meetings in West LA, and I've also recorded conventions starting in 2013. I've got a bunch of those up. And Walt and Mary Murray, the original owners of Encore Audio Archives, started the company in the 80s, and Walt recorded Joe and Charlie's and a bunch of stuff down in Vista, California. My sobriety date is June 20th of 1994. I hope you find something you like, so please like and subscribe to my channel and comment down below. If you want to hear something that I don't have or that you don't see, I'll see that I get it. Anyways, take care and have a great day if you want to.
Good evening. My name is Mary Claire, and I'm an alcoholic.
Hi, Mary Claire.
And I'm pleased, very, very pleased to be here at the wrap-up. I'd like to thank Charlie for extending the kind invitation, and Randy for being such a great and gracious host, and Carrie for picking me up and making a really long drive very quickly without breaking any speed limits to get me here on time on Friday. Wow, where to start? I guess at the beginning. I am the eldest of 9 children in an Irish Catholic family. Surprise, surprise, you know. And my mom actually had 13 pregnancies in 12 years, and 9 of us survived. And my mom was a scientist and a college professor, and my father worked in the insurance industry. He was what they call an arbitrator. He had some medical background and legal background, and he would train the lawyers that would fight the bodily injury insurance cases. And when I was a very little girl, his office was out of their bedroom, which was right next to my bedroom. And I went to school, and I told the nuns that my mom was a doctor, but she didn't work with people, and my daddy gave away all our money. You know, so they were... And why that was because I would hear him settling claims over the phone, you know, and he'd be really compassionate, and I'd hear him go, "Oh, and what happened? Oh, I'm so sorry. Broke both? Oh, dear. Oh. Well, just hold on a minute. Let me just look at the paperwork, and I'll see what I can do for you." There'd be a pause. Daddy would come back on, and he'd say, "You know, I think I can give you $900. Yes. No, don't worry. It's no problem." Meanwhile, I'm in the next room going, "We never go on vacation. We have too many kids. Why is he giving away all of our money?" Not having a clue, you know, that this was his business. My father, we've got alcoholism on both sides of the family, and at this point in time, I have 2 siblings that have no problem with drugs or alcohol, and the rest of us have found sobriety, which is, it's taken... Amazing. The last one, if I have time, will be part of my story. It was most amazing. One of my little sisters gave me my first big book, and she had about 4 years sober when I came in. When I called her to tell her, she said, "You're not an alcoholic. That's impossible. You can't be." And meanwhile, I had got up all the courage in the world to call her and tell her. And then she's talking to herself, and she goes, "Wait a minute, I'm not allowed to say that. You are if you say you are." "Okay, you just told me you are. That means I have to accept it." "Okay, Mary, I'm glad you're in AA." You know, she just went through this whole thing. But she gave me, you know, it's the 3rd edition of the big book, and on inside she wrote, you know, a note to me, as her big sister. She wrote some nice things, and then she said, "And this is the program that saved my life, so I'm so glad that you're here too." And I know we have a 4th edition, but my one that Lori gave me is the one that's so special to me, even today. We never had alcohol at home. We knew that my father had to stop drinking when he was about 17 years old. And all that we know about that was that alcohol and anger went together. There was some kind of an incident. I don't know to this day what it is. And so the rule was when we had any family functions, weddings to go to, things like that, One of the girls was to get Daddy a glass of ginger ale. That was his beverage of choice, and that's just the way it went. However, the rage was unremitting that we grew up with. And I don't get into a lot of specifics. I just say, right now the house is up for sale, and if those walls could talk, they'd be sobbing. My mother began drinking again when I was a teenager, although I was not aware of it at the time, and that's when my little sisters started drinking as well, because they would water down her CLAIR booze and drink it. And I just didn't understand why, my father was plucking them off the pitched roof of the house and things like that. I didn't realize what was happening, and blackouts and all the rest of it. And when I went away to college, I never had really teenage years or much of a childhood, because as the oldest kid, your job is to take care of all the little ones, and there always seemed to be another little one coming along. And I did resent it a bit, but I accepted it. It was just my job. I was sad not to have a life like the other kids at my high school, though. I really regretted that. There was nothing I could do about it, though. And when I went away to college, my pre-departure lecture was all about, you got to study hard and keep your marks up and don't drink because you'll get pregnant. Now, I knew it didn't work that way, but I was, getting a message loud and clear. So one of the first events at the college when we got there, I went to a girls' school. My mom was a professor at the boys' school, and that was in the same vicinity. And we had a thing called a mixer, which is like a big dance, and the boys were on one wall, and we all got dolled up and came in, and we were standing on the other side. And because I'd had no dating experience, no dancing experience, I couldn't even go to basketball games if boys were going to be there. I was petrified. And I remember I walked in, and I ran into the ladies' room and threw up and went back to the dorm, and was like, I just can't do this. And there were girls at the dorm that were like cooler than cool, that were going to go down to the bars. I said, what the heck? So I went down with them, and that was the beginning of my drinking career. We went in a place called the Pinewood. It's right now a Dunkin' Donuts, and it is exactly where I get on the train to come down to work at AA every day. How ironic life can be, But anyway, that was the Pinewood. My first drink was a Black Russian. It was like liquid licorice going down. I loved it. I had a lot of them, and I wasn't scared of the young men that were there, the guys from the boys' school. And just, oh my Lord, I don't know how to explain to you how free I felt. I was free. I was absolutely free. And the thing was, though, we had curfews. We had certain times when you were allowed off campus and times you had to be back. And I missed curfew. So you get brought up before the student court, and you get campused, which is like being grounded, in your household. And I wasn't allowed off campus. And the worst part, though, is that the other girls would shun me because I was like a bad girl. I had to go to student court. But as soon as I was done being campus, like I served my time, I was back out with the gals that went down to the bars and drank. And I would end up, this got to be like a repeating cycle. I just couldn't stop. I just love what it did to me. I love feeling so free. I wouldn't remember what happened. I blacked out, but I didn't care. And at the end of that freshman year, you know how in AA, when we would like someone to do something, we send them what we call a loving invitation to please come speak here, or please accept this, nomination or something. Well, the Sisters of Charity gave me a loving invitation not to come back to their college that next year, because you really couldn't add up my grades and make anything of it. It was terrible. My parents were mortified. I just had no excuse. I just had no excuse. That was the way it was. So I went then to a girls' college where I had to be a day student. I wasn't living away. It was in the same city where my father worked, so now I'm living at home. I'm back into the routine of taking care of the kids, doing your studies, and no social life. And I was very determined to graduate on time in the year that I was supposed to. So I took a lot of extra courses, and I was able to do that, and I did it with good grades. And before my senior year, my mom had said it would be okay for me to live on campus because she knew things were getting worse and worse at home in terms of the violence. And I had this innate sense that, like, if I didn't get out, I might never get out, or get out alive. So I had to leave. And so I did just leave. He wouldn't give me permission. So I left, and my mom helped me with a loan and stuff. And then I worked a bunch of jobs. And so I lived off campus. I lived out of the house for that final year. And that's where my drinking picked up again. I did keep my marks up, but I also started drinking again. The drinking age was lower in New York then. It was 18. I'm not sure what it is now, but for a time it was fluctuating between 18 and 21. And we would have beer all the time, beer blasts, and in front of the dorm was a great grassy, just beautiful grass. And when it rained, it got slick as anything. And we'd just do these slides on the grass and slides in the mud and just, stupid fun, And we had on the back of the campus kind of would be here, and it came along, the acreage went along, and then there was fencing and a drop clear down to a major highway. And right here over the fencing was a huge, it was way higher than this room is, statue of Mary, the mother of Jesus, in the pose that we call the miraculous medal pose. She's kind of got a long veil on and her hands are out like this, So one of our beer blasts, Christmas time, what do? You hang a big sign that says, "It's a boy." So people going by on the highway, called the nuns, "Do you realize you have," so they were not too thrilled with that. But, it was just fun. So drinking was just fun. It was just fun. Graduated, I got my first job working in a home for delinquent teenagers, and I was on a 4-day week, like you worked 4 longer days, and then you had, 3 days off. That's just the way the scheduling was, which was great because then our apartment was party central. And we just had a blast. Drinking was just a heck of a lot of fun. But what happened as a couple of years went by, my friends were getting married, they were going to graduate school, they were doing things that were like getting on with their lives, and I was still living the same way as I had been before, and I sort of felt like they were moving on with their lives and I wasn't, and what was I going to do? And I've always had a thing in my life that when all is said and done and my life is over, I don't want to ever say that I had any regrets. And the one thing that I had that I knew was going to, tweak that was that I had always thought about being a nun. And I had the fortune of going to grade school in the 50s and 60s, and I had very, very good nuns in school. I had a few lay teachers, but I had mostly sisters, and they were fine educators. They were compassionate, kind women, and I really loved them. And school, when home was so painful, school was stable, school was fair, school had continuity. It made me feel worthwhile as a person. It was intellectually stimulating. I just loved school and I loved the nuns. And so I thought if I didn't try being one, I would regret it always. So there was an order of nuns that was working at this place for delinquent teenagers. They were Franciscans, and that was perfect because I always loved St. Francis. I was born on the feast of St. Clair, and I took her name. So I I just had this special affinity for, I was always in the peace movement, and Francis was for peace, and I thought Claire was, kind of secretly his girlfriend, and, so I mean, like, it was like way cool. So I entered that order, and for the next 10 years, I was Sister Mary Claire. And most of it, I was in a habit. We were cleaning out my parents' house, and I found those pictures they saved, and it was like, oh my Lord, I kind of look like a nun doll, But I remember at that time, drinking was in a controlled phase in the convent for me at that time. For the most part, we only drank, if any of you saw the movie Doubt with Meryl Streep, you saw the difference between life in the rectory and life in a convent, and that was very true to form. And in fact, where it was filmed for the nuns was the college that I flunked out of. So it was very, very true to form. We only had alcohol for major feast days, and you would work hard on the liturgy because your prayer life in common means a great deal. And that's when I would get drunk, because we would we would then have wine with dinner. And nobody ever called me on it. And in the convent, people call you on your stuff because your conduct affects the life in common. The way we look at things in our AA group and say, is this affecting the unity of the group? Is this affecting the carrying of the message? We would say, is this affecting the carrying of our mission as Franciscans? Nobody ever called me on it. I just heard two old nuns kind of talking about me at one point. They didn't know I could hear them, and they said, she's drunk again. Would you look at that? Would you look at that? And the other one said, don't worry about it. She's Irish. She's Irish. So I thought, okay, I guess that's a free ticket. I don't know, And I left the convent after 10 years, just because it got to the point of, I just really wasn't happy and knew I really worked at it very, very hard the last 3 years. I felt I wasn't in the right place. I just really wasn't in the right place. And so I did leave after 10 years. And I stayed with the job that I had, which was working for the National Bishops' Conference. Our Department of Communication was based in New York. And I, at that point was with one of the fellows that worked there. Now, we didn't have any clergy on staff because they were all, over the country and everything. It was all lay people. And one guy kept scotch in his desk. It looked like a drawer, but it was really a door that opened up, and there was shelving, and that's where he kept the scotch. And so as soon as it was 5 o'clock, my phone would ring. And this guy, I'll call him Bert, would give me a call and say, you want to come down? And I'd say, sure. And, that's how I learned to drink straight scotch. Other than that, my drink of choice was Southern Comfort Manhattans. Love Southern Comfort Manhattans. So, but this was scotch. And Bert's job was to review major motion pictures and television shows and series before they were released to the public. And I was his sample audience. So Bert and I would sit there with the scotch and watch whatever this was and then give it a rating. So for all you good Catholics out there, we were your Legion of Decency at the time. And nothing bad ever happened, unless you want to look at some of those ratings, except that I would be getting on the wrong express bus to go home. Now in New York City, that's a very difficult thing to do. The buses have on the front of them big letters and numbers that say the route, and then next to it, it'll say to West Farms or to Getty Square. So it tells you what the end stop is on the route. So, you always know where you're going. You really can't get lost. I realize the delegate is a little nervous about getting lost in New York, but I assure you, you really won't get lost. Unless you're really, really drunk. And that's what would happen. And I would end up at the end of a bus line where I didn't belong. And I mean that very seriously. This is back years ago, and there were places, New York wasn't exactly as safe as it is now, and I would land in places where I didn't belong. And what I did was I would always call up my best friend Joni. Now Joni is still a nun in the order that I was in. She's about 13 years older than I am. At the time, she was a cancer care technician at Calvary Hospital, which is the only hospital in the U.S. that's pure hospice. And she was on the early shift, which had her there for a report, I don't know, at 6:30 or 7 in the morning. So the deal is, I tell you all that because this lady had a job where she was on her feet all day, caring for patients who were in an acute stage, needed her sleep desperately, and here am I calling her in the middle of the night to say, I'm lost. And she'd be like, well, where are you? I don't know. Well, what does it look like? And I would try to describe, and she'd say, oh my God, Mary Claire, all right, just don't move, just stay right there, try to hide if you can, and I will come get you. And God bless her, she would put her raincoat on over her nightie and get in the car and come get me and bring me over to my apartment, and this happened so many times, and she never once said, either there in the car or on an off time when maybe we'd go out to a movie or, she'd come over and visit or something like that. She never said, brought up the topic and said, what's going on with you with the buses? What's the matter that you keep doing this? Why? What's going on? She never brought it up. She never said anything. She just picked up the pieces, and she picked up more pieces as time went on. She would come by my place. I got a different apartment after a few years. I had a dog, and I kept getting promotions at work. I eventually left the Bishops' Conference and was working for other organizations, and my drinking just kept escalating. And Joni, I had as my co-signer on my checking account because I couldn't trust myself to pay the bills. Now, meanwhile, by the end of my drinking, I was director of publications for one of the largest nonprofits around. I had well over 11,000 titles under me and multi-million-dollar budget. I'm afraid to open the Con Ed bill. I'm afraid to open the Verizon bill, the phone bill. This is sick. Milk, yogurt, all going to mold and rot and ruin in the refrigerator. Joni was the one that would come over, clean things out, root through the mail, dump out the junk mail, take the bills, and she always had checks, and she would take care of that stuff for me. And I didn't think anything was wrong with that. It was just the way life was. I had gotten to a point of my drinking where I just accepted that that's the way it was. And when I look back at different instances, there were parts of me that I realized died. That was I'm actually a very feisty Irish feminist, and I have a bad temper if I get pushed to that point. So to think that somebody was going to be coming in my house and cleaning out the refrigerator and paying my bills is counterintuitive. I mean, that's not me at all. But that's how I was living. That's what was going on, And booze was the answer to everything. One trip I was on, it was actually a series. We did a city a day, making our way cross country with this other outfit I was working at. And when we hit going into San Francisco, we got word that there was one of these rainstorms in November where the trees get frozen, and in my family's property, big, huge trees, and this big upper branch was frozen, and it fell, and it hit both my parents. And my mother was impaled. She lost an eye. My father broke bones. The two of them were in two different medical centers, and they finally reached me, to come home. And the guys, I was working with a bunch of engineers, and the guys said, oh my God, we better get you downstairs for a drink. Little did they know, And I drank them under the table. And I realized at the time that I was doing it because I saw them kind of looking at each other like, I'm going to sneak away now, okay? And they would be going trying to get away, but I'm still drinking. I took a couple upstairs. I packed my bags. I never cried. I didn't cry, and it wasn't because I was, what would I say, heartless. It wasn't because I was angry or resentful about my youth. I wasn't in shock at that time. It was that there was nothing left. I mean, by then, when I look back on it now, I realize my soul was just dead. There was nothing left. And I got on the next flight that I could home and, you know, took care of things for my mom and dad. But I never really, you know, dealt with all that until so much later. And I sort of realized as time wore on, and I got toward the end of my drinking, I was approaching my late 30s, and I had been engaged briefly to a boy who was like the handsomest kid when we were growing up, and he still was hunky, you know, by the time we were in our mid-30s, and he had never married. And we started dating in August and got engaged in September. Didn't want to rush things, you know. And the thing was, his drinking was heavier than mine. And having been a nun in the parish, I knew, as much as he said things would change after we were married, I would say, Danny, nothing's going to change walking down the aisle. Pretty much what you see is what you get, you know. I mean, we're not going to be who we are today 5 years from now. Hopefully, we're going to grow and change, and, you know, life will unfold in a beautiful way. But we're starting with this basis, you know. And then he threw something at me, and I ducked. And that's all, because I always said, if a guy hit me once, he's dead. That's the end of it. Not like I would kill him, but I mean, I would withdraw myself from the situation. And that was the end of it. And he begged me to go with him to a counselor. I did do that. And the guy sent him to AA and then gave me his business card and said, and if you ever want to look at your drinking, here's my card. And I said, oh, you're so sweet. And I took the card and I put it in my jewelry box. I just thought he was a nice guy. And my fiance didn't stay with AA, so I didn't stay with my fiance. And they told me to go to Al-Anon. And I remember I made the phone call, and there are two things I remember. They told me I had to go to meetings, and as someone mentioned earlier, I was like, wait a minute, I am busy. He's got the problem. How come I have to go to meetings? But the woman said, you can't change it. You know, you can't cure it, you can't control it. And I held that. That was 25 years ago maybe, and I mean, that has stayed with me. And I tell that to people when they call our general service office about a loved one who's alcoholic. I do everything in my power to get them to Al-Anon, and I have since found Al-Anon incredibly helpful because I work with a bunch of alcoholics. You know, it really is very, very helpful. But I, at the end, kind of knew that I was descending into a pit of hopelessness. I was getting drunk at public occasions. There was one where I was supposed to meet someone, the Secret Service wouldn't let me in. Did that make me look at my drinking? No, it didn't. I never lost a job or anything, although one job my boss came in and said, I can tell we had a liquid lunch. And I said, Fran, I didn't even get out to lunch yet. I'm working on this proposal. And she just looked at me. I thought her eyeballs were going to pop out of her head. And she turned on her heel and she walked away. And I'm like, what is her problem? And I sniffed my arm and yuck. And the thing was, even though I was bathing and doing my hair and makeup and perfume and everything every day, I stunk. I was drinking so much now every night that it was coming out my pores. I wasn't a bar drinker, but I would buy the little bottles of wine to get on the train because I needed them to get home. And it was about 11 to 17-minute ride on the train. And then I always had my wine and my stuff to make Southern Comfort Manhattans at home. I was always well stocked. And I would just drink myself into oblivion. And in the morning, I'd stand waiting for the train now, and I would be so angry when I got up in the morning that I had done it again. I did it again when I said I wasn't going to do it again. I hated myself so much, I can't tell you. And on the train tracks, it stamped danger, 600 volts. And there was one place where the D was worn off and it said anger, 600 volts. And that was my place. And God help you if you tried to stand in my place. That was my spot. And at the end, I was daring myself to just lean over. Mary Claire, just lean over. They'll just think you lost your balance. Just lean over when the train comes. And it'll be over. You won't have to deal with this ever again. And then I kept thinking, yeah, but that poor guy who's driving the train, he's probably got a wife and kids, and this will really screw him up, so don't do it, And that was my excuse, and I never jumped in front of the tracks. But I had to have a cure in the morning, eventually, and then I just drank myself into oblivion every day, and Joni picked up the pieces, and that was my life, such as it was. I would say that on a conscious level, I seem to have lost my faith because I felt like if God cared about me, my life wouldn't be so miserable. So if you don't, okay, so you don't care about me anymore, big deal. I'll just have a drink. And what happened, how I got to AA was I had a friend who would come up from Washington. We had been work colleagues for years, and when he came to New York, I took him out to eat. When I came to DC on business, he returned the favor, and he was now working with adult children of alcoholics. And we had a really animated conversation this one evening. And when I went home, I was writing him a thank you note, and I was writing about how I identified with the alcoholism that had been in my family. And what I didn't realize until the next morning when I looked at the note, because with my drinking, everything would be like scribbles running off the page. Well, this letter was clearly written, surprise, surprise. And instead of writing to John about my family's drinking, I wrote this note. I mean, it was my handwriting, so I knew I wrote it, but I didn't remember it, about my desperation and my state of being with my drinking. And I sat there and I looked at it and I said, oh my God, you are an alcoholic. You're an alcoholic. And it was like this huge weight got lifted off my shoulders. I didn't know what to do about it. So I got that guy's card out of my jewelry box, the one from years ago, and I called him up, but he had stayed sober, they told me, but he died of cirrhosis of the liver from many years of drinking. But my dear friend Joni, she had one brother, and he, I knew him from convent visits, when you could have family visit, and he would always visit. And I didn't, he wasn't a friend or anything, but I just knew him. He was a nice guy, lived down in the village. He worked for Columbia University, and he had done a couple of stints on the flight deck at Bellevue. And then the next time he flipped out, he went to Bellevue, and then they sent him to AA, and he was okay. And he had about 12, 13 years sober. And I said to myself, you know what, I have to talk to Dan. So I called him up, and I told him what had happened with the letter and stuff, and that I thought I had a problem with alcohol. And he was a real honest guy, and I knew he would either tell me I had a problem, or he'd say, stop being a drama queen, come on, and he'd tell me to get off it. So he said, whoa, okay, can you not drink until the end of the day? Would you come down to my place? And I said, sure. So I went down to his apartment, and when I got there, I didn't talk to him about my drinking. I started moaning and groaning about my life and how depressed I was and this, that, and the other thing, who knows. And he was sitting in this wicker chair that I now have in my apartment, and he was sitting in the chair with his arms across his chest like a big Buddha, and he had this grin on his face. And finally I got so ticked off, I yelled at him, and I said, what the heck's the matter with you? My life is totally screwed up and I can't stop drinking. He said, fantastic, you just took the first step. I said, what the hell are you talking about? He said, oh, this is beautiful, this is beautiful. Do you want some more decaf? No, I said, because now I'm well into my cocktail hour with no booze, only decaf coffee. Not nice. So he then sits there and he says, I want you to listen. He tells me his story, his AA story, And we had a lot of ways we were really different. I mean, he's male, I'm female, a whole bunch of differences between us. But they just sort of like evaporated in thin air because he drank the way I drank. Or I drank the way he drank. I don't know. But it was just this, oh my Lord, he gets it. He gets it. He gets it. And he said, it was incredible. It was incredible. It was also a little bit scary. I mean, there were things I would never tell Joni that he shared with me, of course. But there was just such identification. I felt like, oh my God, I'm not crazy. I'm not crazy. I'm not different. I mean, maybe I am, but even if I am, so is Dan. So that makes two of us. So at least there's two of us, and that's better than being all alone and being this way. So he said, what you do is, he said, just go to an AA meeting, see if you like it or not. You don't have to stay. You don't even have to talk. And he gave me a great primer. I call it AA 101. He told me what the room would look like and what would go on, and about raising your hand and what to say or keeping it down. You don't have to talk if you don't want to. He said, but know that if you raise your hand and you say you're new, or say that you have 2 or 3 days or whatever it is, people are going to come up to you right away and give you their phone numbers. I said, what? He said, no, it's like a thing we do. He said, the women are going to be like all over you. They will give you their phone numbers, take them, and then get yourself like a little book and write down the lady's name and the phone number. If the men run up to you, we have a name for that. That's not like a good thing, and I'm not going to get into that tonight, but just know that you should run away. I said, okay. So I went into this land of AA. I went to a place called the Mustard Seed, and that was my first AA meeting, and I wasn't going to raise my hand because he said I didn't have to, and I was pretty nervous. But I just tried to listen, and it made a lot of sense to me. It was a beginner's meeting, and I raised my hand and I said that my last drink had been the previous Thursday, whatever, and everybody was like, what he hadn't explained to me was all the clapping. Like when everybody was like, yeah, woohoo! I was not ready for that. It was like that, and the laughter. When people said what I thought were embarrassing things, people laughed, and I'm like, oh dear, I think they're a little rude, but I didn't realize that was identification. And what happened was the guys got to me first. So I ran out of the meeting, and I got on the train and I got home and I'm crying, and I told Dan what happened. He said, don't worry, it happens sometimes. He said, I have another meeting for you. It's called Grand Central. So the next night I went to Grand Central, and that became my home group. And I only stopped going to meetings there, I would say, it was right after I came to work at GSO, because the schedule just doesn't work. So for about 13 years, that was my home group. And you had to walk up the stairs to get to Grand Central, and John was at the top saying, hey, welcome. And I'm like, don't touch me. He says, hey, you're new. We're glad you're here. How do you know? Oh, we know when somebody's new. And I would go in and sit up front, because that's what Dan said to do. And there was a guy who was also sitting up front, and he was kind of built like Dan, and he was always eating a bag of potato chips, and he would say, how you doing? You want one? And I'd say, no, and I'd start to cry. Why was I crying? I have no idea. Nothing was the matter. The meeting hadn't started yet, but I was just weeping, And I loved the meetings. I mean, I loved the meetings. Beginner's meeting is Monday, and Tuesday is step, and the last Tuesday is tradition, and which I didn't quite understand, but then I got it, and then we had speakers and a beginner's workshop on Friday, and I just loved it. I mean, it started and ended on time, and people just appeared out of the woodwork and did everything, and it was the most amazing thing I'd ever seen. I was thinking, boy, the office could take lessons from this AA operation, and one day I was sitting there with this guy, with the potato chip guy, and I'm looking up at the podium, and I noticed they hung up these things. And one says the steps, and the other says traditions, and I'm reading down the steps, and I said, oh, dear Lord, I can't do that. And he looked over, and he said, oh, you finally noticed. I said, well, where did they come from? He said, they've always been there. I was waiting for you to notice. Now that you've noticed, we can get you a sponsor. Hold on a second. So he went over to a couple of women, and he came back to me, and he said, you feel ready for a sponsor? And I said, well, I tried to meet with the temporary sponsor, but she never showed up. Now, that had happened like twice. And then I was too nervous to make another date with her for coffee. And that taught me early on that if you sign up for something, if I sign up for something, be sure that I can do it. Because she really couldn't come across, and it made me feel like I was flunking being a newcomer because she didn't show up. So like something was the matter with me. But he pointed out, he said, you see that lady over there, Rose? I said, yeah. He said, well, she doesn't always smile, but she's really a nice, kind person, and she's got a great program and about 15 years of sobriety, and she said that she'd really like to be your sponsor. I said, okay. So Rose is my sponsor. And we started meeting weekly in the coffee shop and doing the steps. And we used the 12 and 12 initially. And I have to say, for anybody who's new and feeling nervous about any of that stuff, don't worry. If you can just be open and willing and turn it over to your sponsor and your higher power, you will be amazed. You will be amazed. I mean, I used to sit in the meetings and they would read that stuff called the promises, and I would go, yeah, way cool. Okay, for you. Never going to happen to me. That stuff actually does happen. It actually does happen. And life is not perfect. I've lost jobs in sobriety, and I never lost my job when I was out there drinking. That big company that I was doing the publishing operation for, they laid off my entire level of director. And I remember early in sobriety, Rose losing her job, and she was a clerk typist in a big office. And she lost her job, and I remember crying because I felt so bad for her. And she looked at me and said, but Mary Claire, I didn't have a drink today. And I remember I looked at her and I said in my head, boy, are you stupid? Don't you realize you just lost your job? And you're telling me you didn't drink? Like that's a big deal? Well, I was a newcomer. And years later, when I lost my job, I knew exactly what she meant. Exactly what she meant. And with the steps in your life, you know, my experience has been, it isn't always pretty, but I can handle about anything as long as I've got that connection. And I really, really mean that. I have a higher power. Sometimes I call God. Sometimes I call mystery. I have deep respect for those who are atheist and agnostic in the program. That just doesn't happen to be my path. The steps on prayer and meditation mean a lot to me. I never learned how to meditate in the convent, but I found a thing called Siddha Yoga, and I use that path for my meditation. My life now in that respect is really rich and beautiful. You know, I mean, to the point that the steps allowed, like I thought, for instance, how am I ever going to make amends to Joni? You know, newcomers, you're going to get to a step where you make amends to those you've harmed. Man, did I owe that woman amends? What was I going to do besides living a responsible life? And when I first got to GSO, I was there and got a call that the cops had found Dan dead in his apartment. And that was Joan's family, period. That was it. And he knew he was dying, apparently. His heart was giving out. And he had given a list of names, me to be called first, so I could contact Joni. And what I ended up doing was saying, this is my opportunity to make amends to myself and my sponsor. Joni didn't have to know this. It's not her. And so what I did was I tried to make it as easy as possible for her, as devastating as this was. And it meant things like going to the medical examiner and IDing the body, going to the funeral home with her to make arrangements for, he wanted cremation, the urn, you know, all these things, going and standing online to get birth and death certificates, and all the legalese, cleaning out the apartment, you know. I mean, I can't tell you all the stuff, planning a liturgy, throwing a luncheon, doing whatever it would take so that she could as easily, and it was painful, but as painless as possible, transition through this time that she needed to transition through in terms of dealing with the loss of her brother. And I share that with you just to say how for, 13 years of sobriety, I didn't know how the heck I was going to make it up to Joni. And what I came to see is my higher power will give me the way, and it'll happen to you too. Somewhere, someday, somehow, an opportunity is going to open up for you to make the amend that you don't have a clue what you're going to do, how you're going to approach it. There's going to be an act of kindness, there's going to be a forgiveness, there's going to be something beautiful that's going to come your way, and that's been a wonderful, wonderful gift of the program. When I lost my job, the job that I ended up getting was 2 blocks away from Ground Zero at a small foundation, and I was down there on 9/11. And by the time we evacuated, the first tower had already fallen. And, it wasn't like the Godzilla movies. It was slow, silent mass of gray people walking north. You just were covered in ash. And I had talked to Joni before the phone lines went out, and I asked her to call my brothers and sisters, certain ones of them, and let them know I was going to be okay. And I called my sponsor. You never lie to your sponsor. And I told her I didn't think I was going to make it, but I thanked her for all the help that she'd given me, because she made all the world of difference in my life. And we just silently walked north, and what I remember was the way I drank myself into oblivion when my folks had the accident. That's the way people were drinking in the bars, and they were hanging outside the bars and spilling out onto the streets. And just like they couldn't get enough alcohol in them, you just couldn't. Meanwhile, outside the churches and synagogues, they had tables like this with water for us. And I was to meet an old-timer that day for lunch, Irving, and I did meet him. And we went to a meeting. We didn't eat lunch. Who could eat lunch? But we went to a meeting. It was a place I'd never been before. It was in a church basement with pipes in the ceiling, And I remember sitting there and just feeling so awful, and just looking around and saying, oh my God, this is like World War II, because planes were flying cover, and all I could think of was those movies where they were being bombed and hiding in basements, But when I looked around at the people, except for Irving, I didn't know anybody. But I said, this is the litter of puppies where you really belong. It's okay, kid. This is the litter of puppies where you belong. And it was true. It was AA. And we had a fabulous meeting. And that's like the cloak of love that AA will put around you. It's a heck of a lot of work to stay sober. You newcomers, it is a day at a time, and sometimes it's going to be a minute at a time, an hour at a time. But remember, you can do it. You can really, really do it. And before you realize it, the steps, the traditions are going to so fill your life that you won't believe how you've changed. Sometimes in humorous ways. We had at election time, there was a gentleman, if you recall, I think in the early primaries in the Democratic ticket, who was Mormon. Joni was staying over with me for the weekend, and she said, and I'm working at the computer, and she's watching the TV, and she said, do you remember what Mormonism is about? And I said, no, but I'll Google it. So I get on, and I said, they're Easter, a lot of the same feasts as we do. Oh, here's the difference, Joni. What? They only have 10 commandments. Joni says, as opposed to? And I said, don't be silly, 12, of course. She says, 12. I said, Joni, come on. Well, everybody knows there's 12 commandments. Uh-huh. Well, why don't you Google their commandments and see what ones they left out? So I said, I'm already doing it. 10 Commandments, I go right there, and I go, Lord, God, da, 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 da. Huh, What, Mary Claire? I can't figure out what ones they left out. Well, try reading it again. So I did. Couldn't figure out what they left out. She said, okay, why don't you just Google Moses and commandments and see what you come up with. And of course, it's Moses' commandments, 10 commandments. I was saying there were 12 commandments. I was swearing. And you know how feisty Irish, I'm like, when I'm right, I'm right. And I know I'm right. I'm right. I'm right. There are 12 commandments. Don't. She said, you were a nun for 10 years. I said, so I'm sober for 18. What do you want, you know? But that's, you know, and you just have to laugh. You just have to laugh. But I swear to God, I thought there were 12 commandments. I kept saying, there's 12 steps, 12 traditions, 12 commandments, 12 apostles. Everything's 12, Joan. Why do you think there's 10? That doesn't make any sense. Oh. But, you know, there have been one beautiful thing was that I was able to have, my mother had 3 months without alcohol at the very, very end of her life because of where she was. And we had some very beautiful conversations. And I don't know why, but the other kids didn't show up when it was the day she died. And I was able to hold her and sing to her. And it ended up being a moment, I want to say, of mutual forgiveness and great beauty. And it was a gift that sobriety has given me that I don't understand why I was so blessed that I could sing that she could be raised up on the wings of eagles to the Lord. But that's a gift of this program, because left to my own devices, I was going to be dead by 40, and now I'm turning 60, and I have no right to be walking upon this earth except that I am sober, and I owe that to every alcoholic that I meet, and I treasure and try to do my best to serve. And all this, as I've said many times, is a mystery to me, and I end always with a verse from a song called Mystery, because it's a prayer. I will not sing it to you, don't worry. But it's a prayer. I say the verse to myself all the time because it focuses me and reminds me to see my higher power's ways in all that is here. And it's mystery, you are alive. I see you all around. You're the fire in my heart. You are the holy sound. You are all of life, and it is to you that I sing. Grant that I may see you always in everything. Thank you for my sobriety.
I think we got a great talk going on here. Thanks for watching the channel. Taper Dave here. Just curious, do you think this is better than Zoom? Okay, this is how I prepare my drone for launching. I like to do it inside the cab of my truck so I'm not standing outside in the weather. To install the joysticks for control, up and down, right and left, powered on. I have an Android phone that I use to connect it to the drone with, and it's actually controlled through the iPhone, through an app. Oops, wrong way. It's actually controlled through the iPhone, or through this Android phone, through the app. It's actually controlled through the Android phone, through an app, and you connect it through this short connection right here.
Remote control connected.
Remote control's connected. So I pull out the drone. I have to extend the legs. Long legs extended first, then the short legs. Remove the gimbal protector. set that aside, then power it on one short burst and one long burst. I lay it down. So I have to go to calibrate. So the drone's not connected yet. It shows you here as this drone gets disconnected, even though the remote's powered on. So the drone has to establish it's connected. So I go into the app to calibration mode. First I'll calibrate the remote controller. Start calibration. Out, in, oop, out, in, up, down, and then this little wheel is to control the gimbal. So it's calibrated. Go to gimbal calibration, start calibration, and then it calibrates the gimbal. I don't know if that shows up. The gimbal's moving all over the place. Changes, you can see it on the video. And I'm calibrated to take off. It's acquired 7 satellites at the moment. There are 26 satellites up in the sky, which it has to acquire before you can take off. So it's connected. It's got enough satellites. This is white. I can go to press this little arrow button, swipe right to take off, and it would start the motors if I slid this to the right. But I'll wait till I get outside. Don't want to do it inside.